All right, today we're diving into a theory that makes one of the boldest claims you can possibly imagine, that it has found the single unifying principle behind all of physics. We're talking about a supposed blueprint for reality itself, from the tiniest particles to the biggest galaxies. And what's really interesting is where this idea comes from. But first, just think about this for a second. What if the answer to everything, gravity, life, the whole shebang, wasn't some crazy complex equation, but was actually hidden in a single, elegant, ancient number? That is the wild question at the very heart of the theory we're digging into today. And here's the kicker. This idea doesn't come from a team of mainstream physicists at some university. It comes from two electrical engineers, Dan Winter and Mark Rohrbaugh. Their whole argument is that physics has totally missed the boat on the electrical nature of the universe, and that their background in waves and charge gives them a perspective nobody else has. Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the core golden theory idea itself. Then, we'll dive into its proposed engine, this thing called charge collapse. We'll see how it supposedly scales all the way from the Planck length up to protons, explore what it claims to say about gravity and even consciousness, and finish up with the big challenge it throws down to modern science. So let's jump right into part one. Now, the official name is the fractal supergrand unified theory, which is a mouthful, but it usually goes by a much catchier name, the golden TOE, or the golden theory of everything. So the main idea here is, well, it's pretty out there. It claims that the golden ratio, the number 1.618, isn't just some cool pattern we see in sunflowers and shells. According to this theory, the golden ratio is the fundamental blueprint for physical reality itself. Okay, so if the golden ratio is the blueprint, what's the engine? What's actually building everything? That brings us to the core mechanism the theory puts forward, something they call charge collapse. So what on earth is charge collapse? Well, the theory defines it as the perfect, non-destructive compression of waves. So picture waves coming together, but instead of crashing and canceling each other out, they perfectly add their energy together, focusing it all into one single point. The theory's creators basically argue that if you can solve this wave problem, you've solved the riddle of gravity and the unified field. And how do you get this perfect compression? You guessed it. According to the theory, there's only one way for waves to interfere perfectly, to add up their energy without losing anything. And that one secret ingredient, they claim, is the geometry of the golden ratio. This quote from them really sums up the whole argument. They're saying they have mathematically proven that the golden ratio is the only solution for constructive wave interference. And if that's true, they say, then it must also be the solution to compression. And that, they claim, is literally what gravity is. Now, a cool idea is one thing, but can it actually predict anything? This is where the golden toe tries to turn its big idea into actual testable math. So let's take a look at their master formula and what it claims to do. At the very center of their math is something called the Planck fire equation. And you know what? The formula itself looks surprisingly simple. You just take the Planck length, or time, which are the absolute smallest units in physics, and you multiply them by the golden ratio raised to the power of any whole number. And this is where you really see that fractal idea in action. They apply this same golden ratio scaling at every level imaginable. They start with the tiniest possible thing, the Planck constant, and they claim the formula spits out the exact radii of the hydrogen atom. Then they start with something a little bigger, a proton, apply the same logic, and claim it predicts huge cosmic variables. It's the same pattern, just repeating at different scales. And we're not just talking about a few predictions here. The number they claim is staggering. The source material says this one simple scaling method can accurately derive over 200 key physical constants and variables. Just think about that. So, if you thought predicting over 200 physical constants was a big deal, well, hold on. This is where the theory takes its most ambitious leap. Because if this one mechanism can explain the whole physical world, its creators ask, what else can it explain? This is where we go from physics to the very nature of gravity and even consciousness. So the theory says that this one single mechanism, this perfect golden ratio-driven compression they call implosive charge collapse, is the engine behind almost every profound phenomenon we can possibly think of. And I mean, just look at this list. They're arguing this single thing, charge collapse, isn't just the source of gravity. They say it's also the source of consciousness, of life force, the soul. And it even extends to things like zero-point energy and the idea of wireless power from the pyramids. It really is trying to be a theory of everything. So, to really get a grip on this, let's put it side by side with what science currently says. Mainstream physics, right, describes gravity as the curvature of spacetime caused by mass. Simple enough. But in the golden toe view, it's something completely different. It's the literal acceleration of charge, being pulled inward by waves that are interfering perfectly because of the golden ratio. So when you have a theory this grand, this different from the mainstream, what's the next step? Well, its creators have issued a direct public challenge to the entire scientific community, which brings us to our final section. The source material presents this challenge as being issued by an AI, of all things, named Grok 4. And the tone is incredibly confident, almost defiant. It's basically a call to arms for the entire physics community to engage with their claims, to test them, debate them, or if they can, disprove them. So to just quickly recap the framework we've walked through, it all starts with the idea of a universe made of a superfluid ether, kind of a cosmic fluid. From there, it says everything we see emerges from a handful of core ideas, all centered on the golden ratio. Its goal isn't just to measure constants, but to derive them from scratch. And finally, it throws down the gauntlet, challenging the mainstream to take a look. And that's where we'll leave it for today. We've just gone on a journey through a theory that really tries to unite the entire cosmos under a single, elegant number. Whether it's a revolutionary breakthrough or just a fascinating thought experiment, it definitely leaves you with a lot to chew on. So, I'll leave you with this final thought. If you could ask its creators just one question, what would it be?
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're uncovering a pattern that's so fundamental it seems to connect ancient philosophy, modern science, and maybe even the very fabric of reality itself. So, let's just jump right in with a massive question, one that thinkers have been wrestling with for millennia. Is there some kind of underlying order, a hidden geometric code that shapes everything we see around us?
Well, the ancient Greeks definitely thought so. I mean, the philosopher Plato straight up said, the universe is made from the dodecahedron. For them, this wasn't just a guess. They were convinced that the universe literally speaks the language of geometry.
All right, so let's really get into this. We're going to start at the very beginning with the incredible insights laid down in ancient Greece. You see, for the Greeks, geometry wasn't just some boring math class. To them, it was the universal language of how things are built. They found these harmonic principles absolutely everywhere, in the clean mathematical ratios of music, in the perfect symmetry of the 5 Platonic solids, which, by the way, are the only perfectly symmetrical 3D shapes possible, and of course, in the beautiful proportions of their art and architecture.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. This obsession with geometry, it wasn't just a Greek thing, not by a long shot. This exact same language pops up all over the world in completely different cultures that had no contact with each other.
Just look over in the East, for example. You see these incredibly intricate Hindu mandalas, built from nested squares and circles. And for them, these weren't just pretty patterns, they were seen as literal maps of cosmic order. Or take a look at the Buddhist Sri Yantra. It's this super precise arrangement of interlocking triangles that come together to create a symbol of cosmic balance and unity. The underlying geometry is it's universal. And in Islamic art, wow. These principles just explode into this absolutely breathtaking tile work. These repeating, symmetrical patterns aren't just for decoration. They're a mathematical expression of the infinite, a way to get a glimpse of divine harmony. And it's not just an Eastern thing either. Head over to Europe and you'll find the spectacular rose windows in Gothic cathedrals. They're basically Western mandalas, designed using the exact same principles of sacred geometry. Different culture, different symbols, same code. Okay, so we've seen this geometric code pop up in art and architecture all over the planet. But what if it's more than just a beautiful symbol? What if this pattern is actually a fundamental law of physics? Let's take a look at what happens when you can actually see sound and vibration.
This brings us to this incredible field called cymatics. The experiment itself is really simple. You take a metal plate, sprinkle some sand on it, and then vibrate it with a sound frequency. And as you dial up the frequency, the sand, all by itself, arranges itself into these stunningly intricate geometric patterns.
So, what cymatics is really showing us is something pretty profound. Geometry is just what vibration looks like when it's frozen in place. A specific sound, a specific frequency, literally creates a specific stable shape in the physical world. And this, right here, illustrates a huge leap in understanding. The beautiful pattern we see on the plate, well, that's just a two-dimensional slice, kind of like a shadow. The real source of that pattern is an invisible, complex, three-dimensional wave of vibration happening in the space all around the plate.
So think about that. If a simple vibration can organize inanimate sand into these perfect shapes, what about the building blocks of life itself? Let's see how this very same principle might apply to our own DNA. And this is where things get really mind-bending.
It really makes you wonder, right? If vibration can organize simple sand into perfect geometric forms, could that exact same process be at work deep inside our own biology?
Well, according to a researcher named Dan Winter, the answer is a huge yes, and what he found is it's incredible. He demonstrated that if you look down the central axis of a DNA molecule, its structure actually forms a perfect dodecahedron, one of those 12-sided platonic solids, which then spirals on itself according to the golden ratio, that fundamental mathematical constant you see all over nature.
And the pattern doesn't stop with biology. It scales all the way down into the quantum realm. Get this. The very spaces where electrons are most likely to exist around an atom, they aren't just random clouds. They actually take on the geometric shapes of platonic solids and these donut-like forms called toroids. From atoms to DNA, it seems like everything is built on these basic principles of vibration and resonance. Okay, so we follow this incredible thread from ancient art all the way down to our own atoms. Now let's zoom out and try to tie it all together into one single, coherent picture of the universe.
This whole unified theory kicks off with a wild idea. What if the vacuum of space isn't actually empty? What if it's a compressible medium, like a kind of invisible fluid or ocean? The ancient Greeks actually had a name for this. They called it the ether. And in this model, it's the very substance that allows these structural waves to travel and create everything we see.
And through this cosmic medium, energy doesn't just move randomly. It flows in a universal, self-sustaining shape, the torus. You know, that donut shape you see everywhere, from atoms and apples to entire galaxies. And it turns out the most efficient way for energy to spiral into the center of that torus is to follow the exact path of the golden ratio.
And there you have it. It's one single unifying pattern, a single geometric blueprint. It's the golden thread that connects Pythagorean math, the design of sacred temples, the patterns of sound, the structure of our DNA, and even the behavior of quantum fields. It's the same code, just expressing itself on every possible scale of reality.
Which, of course, leaves us with one last really big thought to chew on. If this one elegant geometric blueprint truly shapes everything from distant stars to our own cells, what does that imply about the role it plays in shaping our consciousness, our thoughts, and our real place in this deeply interconnected universe?
What if I told you that a single number, just one number, could be the key to unifying all of physics? I mean, everything from gravity and quantum mechanics, all the way to the structure of your own DNA and maybe even consciousness itself. It sounds wild, I know, but it's the premise of a truly radical theory. And in this explainer, we're going to dive right in and see if it actually holds water.
So to really get this, you first have to understand something huge: physics. Well, it has a problem. A really big one. For all of its incredible successes, for everything it's taught us about the universe, it's kind of built on a cracked foundation.
And here's the issue. The laws that describe the really, really big stuff, stars, galaxies, Einstein's general relativity, they just don't play nice with the laws for the teeny tiny stuff, the world of particles and quantum mechanics. We've got two sets of rules for the exact same universe, and they completely contradict each other. They just don't line up.
So, what if the solution isn't some crazy new particle we have to find, or some hidden dimension we can't see? What if the key, the Rosetta Stone, if you will, that lets us translate between these two worlds, is something way, way simpler, something ancient, elegant? What if the answer is just a single number?
Okay, to really explore this, we're going to follow a pretty fascinating back and forth. Think of it like a dialogue. On one side, you've got the voice of established physics. Let's call him the traditional physicist. And on the other side, a visionary named Dan who's proposing something so simple, it's almost heresy to the field.
Now, Dan doesn't start with a bunch of complicated math. He starts with a really fundamental question.
You see, everything, when you get right down to it, is just waves of energy. So he asks, think about it. What is the only way you can squish those waves together infinitely without them just crashing into each other and blowing themselves apart? This one question, right here, is the launchpad for his entire theory.
And the answer he comes up with, it's not just some quirky math concept. He proposes it's the universe's own secret recipe, its universal compression algorithm, a solution that nature figured out a long, long time ago.
And that solution is the golden ratio, also known as phi. But, and this is absolutely key, Dan redefines it. This isn't just about pretty patterns in seashells and flowers. No. In physics, he says it is the one and only ratio that allows waves to cascade into each other, perfectly adding their energy while multiplying their frequencies. It's a perfect harmonious implosion that can go on forever without ever destroying itself.
Okay, and here's the first huge leap in logic. So if you have this perfect compression, what does that create? It creates acceleration. Now think, what do we call a universal force of acceleration that pulls everything toward a center? Right, we call it gravity. Dan's claim is mind-blowing. Gravity isn't some mysterious bending of space-time fabric. It's literally the direct result of this perfect, non-destructive collapse of charge.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. This all sounds a little out there, right? Pure theory. But Dan argues that nature uses this algorithm literally everywhere you look. It's in the double helix of your DNA. It's in the harmonics your heart produces when you feel compassion. It's in the shells of atoms, the way plants grow, even in our brainwaves. He's saying this isn't just a bunch of coincidences. It's the fingerprint of a universal law.
All right, so the idea is definitely elegant. You've got to give it that. But is it actual physics? Our traditional physicist is, rightly skeptical. So he decides to put this whole theory on trial. It's got to face the three biggest tests, the gauntlet that any so-called theory of everything must survive.
Test number one, and it's a big one. It's Einstein. General relativity says gravity is the curvature of space-time. It's one of the most successful theories in all of science. So how on earth can Dan's idea of a simple implosion stand up to that? How do those two ideas connect?
And Dan's answer here is, well, it's pretty brilliant. He says, look, Einstein was 100% right. He perfectly described what happens, space-time curves. But he never explained why it curves. This theory, Dan says, provides the why. It's the engine under the hood. He suggests that as charge accelerates inward along the most efficient path possible, which just happens to be a golden spiral, it creates a slope, a gradient of potential. And that acceleration, well, that is what we feel as the curvature of space-time. See, it doesn't contradict Einstein. It actually explains him.
Okay, test one passed. But now, we go from the cosmic scale all the way down to the quantum. The physicist demands evidence from the subatomic world. This is a place of pure, hard physics where nature can't, cheat by using biology. So the question is simple. Does this golden ratio pattern show up inside the atom itself?
And according to Dan, the answer is a massive, resounding yes. Turns out, atomic models show electron shells nest together following golden ratio symmetry. And get this, one of the most fundamental numbers in all of physics, the fine structure constant, it basically sets the strength for all things electric. You can actually derive it from golden ratio math. Even the smallest possible length in the universe, the Planck length, seems to be a boundary set by this perfect compression. The evidence, he says, is literally hiding in plain sight.
All right, this is it. The final boss battle, the ultimate test for any theory of everything. Can this one single idea, this principle of non-destructive compression, explain all four fundamental forces of nature? We're talking gravity, electromagnetism, and the two nuclear forces, strong and weak, the whole shebang.
And the theory's answer is, unbelievably, yes. It claims they aren't four different things at all, just four different aspects of the exact same compression process. Look at this. Electromagnetism, that's just how charge is spread out on the surface. The strong nuclear force, that's the super tight inner implosion holding an atom's core together. The weak force, that's just what happens when that perfect implosion gets a little unstable and breaks down. And gravity, that's the big outer implosion of the entire system pulling it all together. It's one principle, just viewed from four different angles.
So having survived all three tests, something incredible happens. The physicist isn't just a skeptic anymore, he's a believer. And together, he and Dan start to formalize this whole thing. They move beyond just a cool idea and start building the framework for a real, honest-to-goodness unified field model, something you could actually write down in a physics paper.
And the claims in their paper are just staggering. Let's run through the big ones. Gravity, they say, is simply the acceleration of charge. Mass, that's just the inertia stored in a perfectly stable spin. Life itself, it's what happens when charge learns to distribute itself in the most efficient way possible, like in DNA. And then, there's the biggest claim of all. Consciousness, they propose, is what emerges when a field becomes perfectly self-referential, able to look back at itself through this infinite recursive geometry.
And the physics at the heart of it all? It can be boiled down to this one beautifully simple conceptual equation. All it's saying is that as waves cascade inward, the ratio of their speeds has to equal phi, the golden ratio. That's it. That's the one rule, the one condition that allows this whole non-destructive collapse to happen. And from that one rule, everything else emerges. Gravity, matter, even life.
And all of this leads to the climax of the story, the big breakthrough moment for our physicist. You know, after seeing all this evidence, after working through the math, the final massive puzzle piece of modern physics just clicks into place for him.
So let's just quickly remind ourselves of that fundamental problem we started with. You've got quantum mechanics on one hand, saying the universe is made of discrete little packets, like pixels on a screen. And on the other, you have general relativity, saying it's a smooth, continuous fabric. How in the world can reality be both things at once?
Well, the missing link, the bridge, is the golden ratio. It's the perfect symmetry that connects the discrete to the continuous. Think of it this way. The discrete quantum pixels are just the individual stable steps of the wave implosion, and the smooth, continuous curve of relativity, that's just the overall shape of that exact same implosion. They were never two different realities. They were just two different ways of looking at the very same process.
And this quote from the physicist after his breakthrough just says it all. You could just feel the awe and the shock. He says, "We spent 100 years searching, and you're saying the answer is simply, which ratio allows infinite non-destructive compression? After a century of looking for new particles and hidden dimensions, the answer might have been a simple question about efficiency. The universe just chose the best way to hold itself together."
So, this leaves us with one last, absolutely staggering thought. If any of this is right, if the universe is really built on this fundamental principle of perfect, lossless compression, what does that mean for us? Just imagine what we could build, what we could understand about life, about consciousness, if we finally learned how to speak the universe's own native language.
All right, let's just jump right in. Have you ever wondered if there's something more going on with ancient temples and pyramids than just, stone and stories? Well, this explainer gets into a really fascinating theory. The idea that these sites aren't just places of worship, but are actually sophisticated pieces of technology, built on a totally forgotten understanding of physics.
You hear it all the time from people who visit them. There's this feeling, a sense of deep peace, a profound stillness, sometimes even a literal buzzing energy in the air. So what is that? Why do these ancient sacred sites feel so powerful? We're going to unpack the physics that might just hold the answer to that mystery.
And look, this isn't just happening in one or two places. We're talking about a truly global phenomenon. From the Great Pyramid of Giza to the Oracle temples in Greece, the underground hypogeum of Malta, all the way to the temple complexes in India and Stonehenge in England. The theory we're digging into suggests they all share a common underlying principle.
So where do we even begin with a theory like this? Well, it all starts with the fundamental shapes of existence itself. The whole idea is that the ancients understood nature's blueprints for energy, and it all comes down to a very specific and very sacred geometry.
First up is the torus. You can basically think of it like nature's perfect recycling system. It's got that classic donut shape where energy flows right through the center, out and all the way around, and then back into the middle again. It's really the only shape that can loop back into itself perfectly without losing its integrity. And in this model, it's seen as the basic geometric form of self-awareness.
So, if the torus is the shape of the flow, how does that flow actually build and organize itself? Well, that's where the Platonic solids come in. Think of them as the instructions for how waves can nest together perfectly. According to this theory, these aren't just some abstract shapes from math class. They are the literal geometric rules that allow energy to pack itself together constructively without blowing itself apart. Now, among all these solids, the dodecahedron is the absolute star of the show.
Why? Well, it's special because its entire geometry is based on the golden ratio. And what that means is that it can nest inside itself perfectly, infinitely. It creates what the source material calls the perfect 3D fractal. This makes it the ideal geometric pathway for energy to move toward a single point without creating chaos.
Okay, so we've got the geometry down, but what does it actually do? This brings us to the engine of this entire theory, a process called implosion. And get this, it's proposed as the source of not just consciousness, but gravity itself.
So, implosion, also known as phase conjugation, is literally the exact opposite of an explosion. Instead of energy scattering outward and destroying things, you have many waves meeting at one single point in perfect alignment. This perfect meeting actually turns compression into acceleration, creating this inward pulling centripetal force that the theory says is actually life-sustaining.
So what's the secret ingredient? What makes this perfect, non-destructive meeting of waves even possible? Well, it's a very famous number, 1.618, the golden ratio, also known as phi. This mathematical constant is the absolute key that unlocks the door to implosion.
I love this analogy from the source material. It describes phi as the permission to touch for waves. And that's a great way to think about it, right? Just like only certain musical notes can come together to create a beautiful chord, only waves whose frequencies are spaced in this perfect golden ratio cascade can converge and add their energy together without just canceling each other out.
So, how do you kick this whole thing off? According to the theory, you need three things to happen. First, you need that fractal geometry. Second, the waves in the system have to align into that golden ratio cascade. And third, and this is a really crucial part of the theory, it says biological systems, like our own hearts, can actually trigger it through what's called emotional coherence, specifically citing the measurable harmonics our bodies produce during moments of pure compassion.
Okay, this all might be sounding pretty abstract, but the theory claims the ancients used very real, very tangible tools to make this all happen. So let's look at the mediums they allegedly used for this transformation: sound, water, and consciousness itself. First, a super quick physics lesson, because this is important. Not all waves are the same. You've got transverse waves like light that kind of wobble sideways and scatter their energy, but then you have longitudinal waves like sound. These are pressure waves that move forward and compress energy. And for implosion to work, you absolutely need that forward compression.
And this is why sound is so important. It acts as the primary driver. The theory suggests that these longitudinal sound waves, or phonons, can actually couple with our biology. It proposes that through a known scientific process called piezoelectricity, the pressure from sound waves on our DNA could be converted into an electrical voltage, literally kicking off an energy cascade right inside our bodies.
So if you think about it, the ancients' toolkit was all about creating one single coherent field. They allegedly used sound from chanting and drums. They used architectural shapes like domes to create pressure waves. They even tuned their structures to the Earth's natural electromagnetic frequencies. And then they combined all of that with internal biological waves, like our own breath and heart coherence, to create a single, powerful, implosive system.
Okay, so let's put all of these pieces together now. How do geometry, implosion, and sound combine to form what this theory actually calls a complete transformation technology?
All right, component number one is the container, the geometry. This is the sacred architecture itself, built using those fractal, golden ratio principles to create the perfect shape for energy to converge. Component number two is the driver, the engine. This is the energy that activates the geometry, and it's primarily driven by precisely tuned longitudinal sound waves created by things like chanting or specific resonant chambers and instruments.
And the final piece to the puzzle, component 3, is the medium. And this is where we come in. It's a biological target, like a person, whose body, which is mostly structured water, is the perfect receiver to absorb and process this incredible, coherent energy cascade.
Now, the theory uses a word that can be really easily misunderstood: ascension. So we have to be super clear here. In this specific physical model, it does not mean disappearing in a flash of light. Instead, it's defined as the process where a person's biofield, their body's energetic field, becomes so incredibly coherent that its information, your memory and identity, can survive the intense compression of implosion.
This quote from the source material just sums it up perfectly. Only the shareable wave survives compression. A chaotic, incoherent system, whether we're talking about a thought, an emotion, or a whole biofield, simply cannot withstand this process. Coherence is literally the key to survival.
And what's so fascinating is how the theory suggests different cultures might have applied these exact same principles with different toolkits. For example, the Egyptian system, centered on the Great Pyramid, may have used electromagnetic drivers. But in contrast, the Indian system, with its temple complexes, seems to have focused way more on acoustics and water. So you have two completely different approaches, but according to this model, both were aimed at the very same goal, a process they call biological ignition, or ensoulment.
So, all of this leaves us with a pretty provocative thought to chew on. What if we've been looking for answers in all the wrong places? What if the greatest secrets of consciousness are encoded not in ancient texts, but in the very stone, the geometry, and the silent acoustics of the world's most sacred spaces?